What's up, awesome nerds? Today we are talking about Significant Moments in the Life of My Mother by Margaret Atwood. So this is one of the stories that are part of our short story unit. And today we are going to be focusing on three aspects of the story. If any of the things strike your fancy or pop out to you, fantastic. But the three we're going to focus on: characterization, euphemisms, and rhetorical shifts. So you're going to see some shifts in here. You're going to see the way that Atwood describes both her mother and herself from different perspectives of other players in the story. And you're also going to see euphemisms, which are just, less direct ways of saying certain things. So we're just going to practice with those things. And I'm going to go ahead and explain what you are to do for this assignment. So everything is on a Google Doc for this one. And as you're reading, I'm going to go ahead and present it. If you need to change things up and make it so that you're, so you need to add slides onto here, totally fine. You do whatever you need to do. But so we're going to start, put your name on here. Here's some vocab help. So in order to characterize, you describe the distinctive nature or features of a character. This essentially is the author showing the reader who a particular character is. This is everything from description, from physical description, mentality description, the dialogue that they use, the way they describe their tone, everything that you get so that you can kind of create some sort of picture. And so what I want you to pay attention to when you're reading this is, how do you picture Atwood's mother? How do you picture Atwood, Margaret Atwood? So this is a female writer from Canada. And as you're reading it, what do you imagine? What do you think she looks like? What do you think she sounds like based on the descriptions that Atwood provides? And remember, this is a daughter retelling stories that her mother told. So everything is through the lens of the daughter. And so that's going to, color the interpretation. It's going to change it a little bit. The other is that the mother is going to use a lot of euphemisms. There's a particular scene where you realize how proper the mother is. It involves cat pee and a skirt, so enjoy that. But there's a euphemism, and a euphemism is an indirect way, some sort of less offensive. So there's one part where the mother will say "Hail Columbia" rather than "hell," or if you were a kid and you ever said, "he double hockey sticks," or "he kicked the bucket" rather than saying "he died," or "she lost her lunch" rather than saying "she vomited." So euphemisms are just slightly more polite and acceptable ways to say certain things. And the mom uses them often because that's the era she comes from. So pay attention to how that also affects the way that you imagine her being, the way that she probably holds herself, the way that she interacts with people. And finally, we're going to have a rhetorical shift. And so this occurs when the author of an essay significantly alters their diction, syntax, both. And so when Atwood is describing her mother and retelling her mother's stories, there's a certain type of syntax, there's a type of sentence structure, a type of diction, author's choice of words that she uses when speaking through as her mother. But then there's a shift when suddenly Atwood is telling stories that her mother tells about herself, about Atwood. So it's a daughter. In the second part, you'll see a daughter retelling the mother's stories about the daughter. And so it's this very cyclical kind of narration. It's not the daughter telling her own experiences necessarily. It's the daughter telling about how the mother describes the daughter. And so you're going to see how there's some disconnect here. And so pay attention to where that disconnect might be originating from, what might be causing it. And this is one of those places where the author might not necessarily give you the answers to that question, but she's going to give you some hints and let you fill in the blanks, because a good writer is going to leave some work for the reader to do so that the reader is actually part of the creation of the meaning. So there isn't necessarily one exact meaning in the story. There isn't exact one message. There is interpretations. And so again, in this class, we're always going for an interpretation that is your own and that makes sense. As long as we cover those two things, then feel free to take some risks, go with your gut. How do you feel when you're reading this? So if you're really struggling, you're like, I don't know, pay attention to how you feel. And that's why the first question that we start with is up, down, both, why? So up, down, both, and then why do you feel, and I'm focusing on the Atwood's characterization of her mother. When you read about the mom, do you get a sense that it's positive? Do you get a sense that it's negative? Is it both? And why do you think you're feeling that way? So the reader is a really important part in interpretation. Without the reader, they're just words on a page. They mean nothing. You are in a very important part. And this is actually a literary theory called reader response theory, saying that says that essentially the meaning of a story is nothing without the reader. I don't know if I would go that far, but you are a very important part of the interpretation of the story. So if you're reading it and you're finding that you're not understanding, then that's where your annotations are going to come in. So if you're not having an emotional response to this, then you probably need to either read it again, read it a little more closely, or make sure that you're annotating so that you know what questions to ask. Okay. And I'll show you the annotations I've super simplified. Again, we're talking about characterization. So describe, how does the information supplied about the mother make you feel? So characterize, describe the distinctive features of the mother using information supplied in the story. Try to give page numbers where you can. And then halfway through the story, you're going to see that shift that I talked about, that rhetorical shift from the perspectives. First, it's the mom telling about her own life, and then it's the mom talking about Atwood. But again, Atwood is she's the one that's writing everything. And so then pay attention to how differently Atwood comes across in the mother stories versus her own reminiscences. So she includes both the mom's telling of her daughter's stories, and then the daughter saying, but this is really what was going on in my head. This is a rhetorical shift. So pay attention to that. And then Atwood includes direct quotes. We're going to do some dialogue analysis. What does this do for the overall feel of the story? If everything that she said was through her own words and didn't provide these quotes, would that affect the way that you interpreted it? And then finally, do some brainstorming. If you were to choose one or two of the 7 concepts and explain its connection to the story, basically just, is this a story about identity? About the creation of identity, the way that we see our own identity? Is this a story about culture, creativity, communication, perspective, transformation, or representation? I think the ones you're probably going to gravitate towards are identity, communication, and maybe perspective, because you've got, 2 family members who have different perspectives on events and people. You also have communications, both successful and unsuccessful. And then also identity, Atwood's identity of herself versus her mom's, and her mom's perspective on her identity. So there's a lot of shifting in here. And then, you have those links to the 7 concepts. If you want to break it down further, those are in your learner portfolio. There's some really good guiding questions for that. If you're like, I don't know what to write about, go look at those guiding questions in your learner portfolio and just respond to those. See which ones you feel like you can answer. And so for annotations, super simple. As you're reading, also I found an audio recording of the author reading her story. So if you need to listen to it as you read, go for it. All you need to do, you're going to use text boxes. So you're going to have to actually, as you're reading, you might want to make it a little bit bigger, but you can either put it in the margins here and just kind of open up the text box, or what you can do is you can also insert your own text box in the places where you feel like you want to. So when you read this paragraph, if you're like, holy guacamole, that's amazing. All right. Exclamation point. You can make it bigger if you want. Let's get crazy. So whenever you read something that's like, that's interesting, you can write about why it's interesting, or you can just say, it stands out to me. And we can, that gives you something to talk about later. The second thing is, I want you to put question marks. Anytime you read something and you're like, I don't get this, put a question mark on there. And then I also want you to keep a running list of new words. Things that you see that you're like, I've never seen that before. You're going to see some older terminology in here. You might have to look some things up if you want to understand what's going on in the story. Just like in the previous story where it's like, stick your oar in something. So she uses some euphemisms. She uses some colloquialisms, which is just a fancy word for like slang terms that people use. And that's one of the things about writing, is that sometimes when we use slang, like Southern California slang is going to be different than Northern California slang, which is going to be very different from Wisconsin slang, which will also be different from Mexican slang and Canadian slang. So when we use slang, we have to remember that our audience might not necessarily understand it exactly, but are we providing enough of a context to where they can get the gist of it without needing a direct translation? And so you might have to do some translating. Some of these things will not translate directly. So as you read, pay attention to what stands out to you, what questions you have, so that when you show up, you know kind of where you want to start and what's going on. So we'll start with questions when we get into class, and attempt the answers to the questions, please. I will give you some time to work on them in class, but I highly recommend you coming in with answers. Again, if you need to add a slide here, just go ahead, add it, move the questions down if you need it, not a big deal at all. So I'm here if you have questions. Please read this at least once on your own. You might need to read it twice. Again, DP problems, y'all. So make sure you set aside, you're probably going to need, if you listen to it, it's going to take 40 minutes. So 40 minutes plus annotations, you're looking at least about an hour probably on this particular assignment just for the reading. So make sure you carve out that time in order to get it done, and then maybe throw in some possible answers and things like that that you are ready to bring to class, because we will start class with these discussions. So make sure, discussions about these questions. So you're going to have to make sure that you either understood the story or you know what questions you need to ask in order to understand it better. Okay? You got this. I believe in you. Love you. Have a great day.